Good morning to all of you, and warmly welcome to today's event about substitution and the forest value chain and its impact on climate policy. We're very happy to see so many here this morning. We had the privilege to be today's moderator. My name is Magnus Norman.
And my name is Katrina Hurskog.
And we have both been working many years inside the EU institutions and also within the Swedish administration. Since 2 years ago, we run something that we call Impact Europe, which aims to build bridges between organizations, politics, and the EU decision-making structure here in Brussels.
And bridges are indeed very important in the world of forests. Bridges play a very big role in connecting the policymakers with the industry, and forests play a key role in the EU's ambitions to reach the climate policy target of climate neutrality in 2050. So this is why FAM commissioned a study on a very important aspect of the forests, and that concerns material substitution, how forests can make sure that we reduce the emissions substantially. And this study has been produced by AFRY and is the focus of today's event. And what will happen today, Magnus?
Yes, and maybe we should say also that today's event is live streamed, so also welcome to everyone who is following us online this morning. It's a hybrid event. So I will shortly give the floor to the Corporate One Ambassador of Sweden, Torbjörn Haak. Then we will listen to some introductory remarks from the CEO of FAM, Håkan Buskhe. And then we will dig in a bit deeper into the study, listening to the authors of the study from AFRY, Salla-Mari, and then also Magnus Fernström, the investment director from FAM, who will walk you through the study and some of the main conclusions. And then we look forward to and we're very happy to have a Member of Parliament, Emma Wiesner, with us here today. A warm welcome to you. We'll have a short panel discussion together with Emma Wiesner and also Peter Holmgren, who will be joining us on the screen. And he's the former head of climate policy at the FAO and has a long and extensive background in international forestry. And then we'll get to the Q&A. We hope that you have many questions to ask the panelists and the speakers today. And then to wrap up, Henrik Vasallo from FAM will offer some concluding remarks. So yes, that's the plan for this morning.
So warmly welcome, and let's kick off. I'd like to introduce Torbjörn Haak, who is the Deputy Representative Ambassador here of the Swedish representation. The floor is yours.
And a warm welcome also from me. We have, in the past 5 years, as you know, we have had an enormous legislative program to work on and to digest. It's now being finished, and we're moving into a phase, I think, that one can see in a twofold perspective. One is, of course, for member states to put this legislative program to work, implement it, and there is a good deal of challenges for member states in that respect, and it will be very interesting to see how that develops. There is also another perspective, and that is the one of reflecting and thinking of what we've done and where we're moving, what would be the next steps in different respects. And one very topical issue in that perspective is indeed forests and how we deal with forests at national and EU level, and what kind of different approaches that we should be working on. I think that looking ahead, to those of you who are listening to Talk of Town here, you hear approaches labeled as an investment policy, an investment approach. You may have concluded that for a next commission, the perspective of competitiveness will play a major role, although I think the jury is still out there how you define competitiveness, and there might be very different approaches there, as we've seen. But in any case, I think looking ahead, there is one perspective that will play a dominant role, and that is that of innovation and adapting our economy to the demands of the future. And in that respect, the bioeconomy and what we do with our forest, how we can use them, how we can live with them, and how we can develop them will play a very important role. And in that respect, today's seminar comes in very timely. So I'm looking very much forward to the presentation today. I wish you the best of luck today, and I hope that it will be very informative. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Torbjörn, and yes, an applause. And thank you for letting us be in your home also this morning. That's very appreciated. Now we will welcome Håkan Buskhe, who is the CEO of FAM, and he will give a background and some context to the study that will be presented later. So Håkan.
Warmly welcome to this morning launch event of the report entitled Substitution Potential and Climate Impact in the EU Forest Value Chain, that is organized in cooperation between FAM and the Future of Forest. My name is Håkan Buskhe, and I am the CEO of FAM, the private holding company of Wallenberg family. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I would like to take this opportunity to make some introduction remarks on the role that European forests are playing today and how it will continue to play a crucial role in tomorrow's bio and circular economy. As you know, Sweden has some of Europe's largest forests, and throughout my life, as well as the life of my parents, and in turn their parents, the forests have played a pivotal role, not only providing decent livelihood, but also contributing to the concept of the whole Swedish lives, meaning that the whole country can live literally thousands of kilometers away from the urban cities. The forest and the fiber-based raw material have throughout the ages been used for a whole range of products. Everything from traditional timber houses, pulp and paper, tools and means of transportation, such as carriages, boats and ships, boxes, crates and transportation products, and produced across the continent. Without being aware of it, all these products have acted as a carbon sink, storing carbon for decades, whilst it sometimes makes room for new young trees, replacing the harvested ones. As time has passed, we have found new usage of fiber, and we are still today finding novel way use of tree, such as producing batteries, glass and textiles. What this use of fiber does is not only to act as continued carbon storage throughout the whole lifetime of a product, but also acts as substitute of fossil-based raw materials. What you will be hearing and learning about today in the seminar is the quantification of the CO2 emission savings from this century-old use of tree fiber. In today's world, where sustainability and green transition are top of the agenda, we need to ensure that everything we do also benefits environment and sustainability, to contribute to reaching the Paris goals and sustainability future. The study clearly shows that the forest has a vital role to play and can further contribute to these goals, whilst at the same time respecting biodiversity and continue providing livelihood for millions of Europeans involved in the forest-related value chain. The recreation relaxation that the forest provides is not quantified in this study, but comes as an added bonus of having sustainability activities manage European forest. I don't intend to steal the thunder of my colleagues, Magnus and Henrik, who will be presenting and talking about the study. But since I'm so excited on findings of this study, I want to share some highlight with you. If you imagine that all the tree fiber used were to be considered substitution from fossil intensive materials such as steel, concrete, plastic, polyester, etc., we are today saving 390 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. That is equal to the total annual emissions of Belgium and France combined. Imagine so much more we can do if we are to use these findings in order to optimize the use of the strategically scarce resources that is the European forest. These and other things I imagine you will be discussing during this important seminar. I wish you an interesting morning. Thank you for listening.
Now I'll call on one of the authors of this study to present a bit of the underlying methodology and some of the assumptions that you've been making in the study. Salla-Mari Järvinen from the AFRY team. Please, the floor is yours.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Salla-Mari Järvinen, and I was asked to briefly explain you the methodology for our study. But before we start, I think it's important to highlight that our aim in this study was to analyze the additional substitution potential and climate impact of forest fiber-based products in the EU up to 2050. So the substitution in this study refers to the use of forest fiber to replace and reduce the use of fossil-based materials. And we used a specific approach to study this topic that I will now briefly explain to you, starting from the substitution volumes that were used for these additional substitution calculations. And I'm using here as an example from the packaging. So packaging was one of our key focus product areas in this study. So we had virgin fiber-based packaging, and then other product areas included wood products, for example, sawn wood used in new wooden buildings, cellulosic textile fibers, so man-made cellulosic fibers such as viscose, and biofuels and biochemicals. So, for example, product that we get from the pulp mill side streams. But how we started the analysis? First, we estimated the volumes for the substitution calculations, and our base year was 2021. And here you can see that the demand in the EU for fiber-based packaging was 15 million tons. And to calculate the substitution impact, we have to analyze what is the fossil-based counterpart for the fiber-based packaging. And in this case, it was, of course, plastic packaging. And one important note here is that in our calculations, we assume that the material is either fiber or fossil-based. So that's why in our approach, we had to use equivalent volumes. So that's why you can see that the fiber-based packaging was 15 million tons, and the same volume in plastic plastic volume is 7 million tons. So we had to use specific conversion factors to standardize these volumes and get the equivalent volumes for the calculations. And the same logic was applied to the volumes in 2050. So we prepared several demand scenarios for the EU demand in 2050. And here you can see that in our mid-demand scenario, the virgin fiber-based packaging is assumed to grow to 24 million tons, and the same volume in plastic is assumed to be 11. And these scenarios were based on different assumptions of the developments of key demand drivers, for example, consumer thinking, policy frameworks, as well as technical innovations. So that was the first part of the analysis. And then the next part was to analyze the specific emission factors for these product areas, because we need to know that how much emissions are generated in these product areas. So that's why we calculated specific emission factors for each product area. And these emission factors were formulated from different sources, for example, LCA databases, using our own LCA expertise, as well as dedicated softwares for these kind of calculations to ensure comparable methods and system boundaries. And on this slide, you can see examples from the packaging side. So here you can see the emission factors that we used in our packaging calculations. And it is important to note here that we have included the end-of-life phase in these emission factors. And because there is no that much information available about the end-of-life phase, so that part is estimated by AFRY. But it is important to note that it is included in these numbers. And once the substitution volumes for these calculations were estimated, as well as the emission factors calculated, then we were able to calculate and analyze the potential climate impact. And that was done by multiplying the volume by the emission factor for each product area. And here I have one specific example from the packaging side. So, for example, in the study, we compared kraft paper to flexible plastics. So, as you can see, first we estimated the volumes for both plastic and fiber by using specific conversion factors for plastic. Next, we calculated the emission factors for these product areas. And finally, by multiplying the emission factor by the volume, we were able to calculate the potential climate impact. And in this specific example, you can see that, for example, in the plastics, 8 million tons of emissions were generated, while in the fiber side, the emissions generated totaled 3.3 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So already in this specific example, you can see that the emission reduction potential was 4.7 million tons. But this is only one specific example. So we did the same analysis for all the product areas. So in some cases, the impact can be higher or lower, or in some rare cases, there is no impact at all. So that was briefly about the methodology. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Salla-Mari. And I should also say that in the brochure that was handed out, that were on your seats when you came, you can read a little bit more about the key assumptions and the methodology. It's pages 33 and 34. And Salla-Mari has also promised to be part of the Q&A at the end if you have further questions on this. So now we know the basic assumptions, we know the methodology, or at least we think we know a little bit about it. So let's dig into the real substance of the report. And we are very happy to have Magnus Fernström to guide us through the key conclusions. Magnus is investment director at FAM and will take us through the study. I will help you with that. The floor is yours, Magnus.
Thank you, Katarina. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see so many faces here, and also hello to everyone online. To counter climate change, let's see if we can get the slide. Thanks. To counter climate change, we must replace more fossil materials with sustainable alternatives. Here, forests and the forestry sector can play a key role. As you know, growing forests remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the trees. Wood products store carbon throughout their life cycle, and wood products and bioenergy can substitute fossil-based materials, which reduces emissions. In our study, as you've already heard, we have focused on the avoidance of fossil-based materials by using fiber-based ones instead. And this is what we call material substitution, which leads to a circular emission cycle in contrast to fossil emissions, which are typically linear. Now, forest fiber is a strategic, large-scale, renewable asset that we have access to in Europe today. Bio-based products are largely sourced, manufactured, used, recycled, and reused in Europe. So growing the market for bio-based products enhances Europe's resilience, which is important in today's geopolitically unstable world. And here you see some familiar examples of key uses. Sawnwood for construction, pulpwood for packaging, for hygiene products, and residues, mostly used today for bioenergy, but increasingly and tomorrow for biochemicals, biofuels. So if we look at the four categories on the right-hand side of the slide, wood products, paper and board, textiles, and biofuels and chemicals. Substitution, i.e. the avoidance of using fossils, is already today helping us reduce emissions across Europe substantially. In our calculations, it's 390 million tons CO2 equivalents in annual emissions. This is 2021 figures. This is the equivalent of the emissions of 50 million people. And to put it in other words, you save every year all the emissions of Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Portugal put together. And this does not include bioenergy, which has a significant substitution effect compared to fossil energy, or the emissions of Finland and Sweden, the utilization of residues when bioenergy is compared to natural gas and coal is avoiding emissions of 74 million tons CO2 on top of this every year. So given the substitution already taking place today without any significant policy incentives in place, we wanted to study if this substitution effect could be further increased without, of course, compromising any of all the other very important considerations that have to be part of an active sustainable forest management, such as biodiversity. So we chose to deep dive in 4 product categories to estimate their potential for additional substitution. And these are Structural building materials in new wooden buildings, fiber-based packaging, cellulosic textiles, and liquid biofuels and chemicals. And as you can see here, this is up until 2050. Fiber-based packaging has a fairly big substitution potential. And through the methodology that you've just heard from AFRY, we estimate that these 4 product categories today yield a yearly substitution of 90 million tons CO2 equivalents, and that this could grow in 2050 to 161 million tons. A technical note, we're talking about what we call a mid scenario here. In the printed report that's been distributed to you here today, we also calculated other scenarios, given the uncertainty associated with forecasting for such long time periods. And as you've heard from Salla-Mari, these scenarios were influenced by multiple factors, changing consumer preferences, shifts in policy and regulatory frameworks, the development of technical innovations, all the way from how do we treat membranes in packaging to what's the recycling levels. Here, today, we focus in the presentation on the mid scenario, but you can read more in the report. Now, together with the substitution from other fiber-based products that were not in focus in our study, and these grow from 300 million tons CO2 to 400 million tons in 2050. This yields a total substitution in 2050 in our mid scenario of 561 million tons. On the left side, my left side of the screen, you can see the emission factors that were calculated for different material groups, and the bubble sizes reflect emissions per volume. I want to underline something quite important. Material substitution is, of course, only part of the solution to our vast climate change challenge. Transitions will have to take place and are beginning to take place in many other industries as well. And of course, more use of bioenergy could also bring considerable climate benefits, very appropriate. So let's turn to the big picture. How important is this emission reduction overall? What's the contribution? We can reference this by looking at the emissions of the sectors that are relevant to this study: manufacturing, energy, transportation. Without considering the existing substitution effect, the 390 million tons, current emissions from these relevant sectors stand at 2,440 million tons. This is Eurostat figures from 2022 for these relevant sectors. So the material substitution of 561 million tons can take us 1/4 of the way to net zero by 2050 in these sectors. So you might ask yourself, would an additional 161 million tons be significant or not? Well, it's not so much compared to 2,440. And as we said, it's true. This is not by any means the only solution, but it is certainly part of the puzzle. And compared, for example, to Sweden's annual CO2 emissions, this is 4x. Quite significant from that perspective. Now, to achieve all this, we have to increase our fiber supply without compromising other forest benefits, such as biodiversity. And we've looked at the numbers. Today, the fiber supply in Europe yearly stands at 679 million cubic meters. We would have to increase this with a further 173 million cubic meters up until 2050. And this is our mid scenario. So this is 25% increase. Can this be done? Yes, from a numbers perspective, there is enough unutilized potential for increased fiber supply across Europe, and especially in Southern and Central Europe. Achieving this means promoting active sustainable forest management across Europe. This would further promote forest growth, which in turn would increase the forest carbon sink, which would provide raw material for fossil substitution and, done right, would support biodiversity targets while also helping combat soil erosion and water issues. However, an obstacle to all this is that current EU legislation is not taking into account the importance of the bioeconomy, its important climate benefits, the substitution effect, nor its strategic resilience aspects for Europe. We hope that the next European Commission will also take these aspects into account. We need a more supportive policy environment for material substitution to achieve the forest's full climate potential. At the same time, forest owners must continually develop forestry practices to achieve better biodiversity in European forests based on each forest's characteristics. Now, this includes, among others, increasing the variety of species for increased resilience, e.g. the share of broadleaves, setting aside areas of high biodiversity value, and continually developing harvesting methods and a fit-for-purpose forestry. Of course, all in the due stride of business, also taking plenty of other considerations, including economic and social ones. So, to conclude, our recommendations for future policies related to forestry and the bioeconomy are: growing and actively managed forests remove more carbon from the atmosphere. Increasing the substitution from fossil to fiber-based new materials and raw materials is crucial for the EU to reduce emissions and enhance resilience. And forest-based innovation can continue to deliver new solutions to combat climate change. Forest owners also have to do their part. And as a representative of one of Sweden's major forest owners, we pledge to invest in forestry research and to continue managing our forests with the dual purpose of providing fiber for society and safeguarding biodiversity, while at the same time investing in innovative new ways of using the fiber to replace fossil alternatives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Magnus. A lot of interesting conclusions and a very hopeful message in the study that the forest can play a key role as one of the ingredients in this climate journey that Europe is on its way to become carbon neutral by 2050. Thank you so much. Now we've heard a bit about the methodology. We've heard about some of the conclusions. Now we're, of course, very excited to hear what people think about this study. And it's not just any people that we have here. Now, Emma Wiesner, I'd like to invite you up on the stage here. A warm welcome to you again. Emma, for those of you who doesn't know, she is member of ENVI committee. She's from the Renew group. Well, what more, you've been active on many different, if you want to sit in the middle here, you've made a big impact during your time in Brussels, and you've been very active on many forest files. A warm welcome to you. And then online, we also have Dr. Peter Holmgren, who, good morning, Peter. Can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you. I hope you hear me. Sorry not to be with you.
Perfect. We hear you loud and clear. Welcome to this panel discussion as well. As I said in the beginning, Peter has long and extensive experience from international forestry issues, and we're very glad to have you here, Peter. Katarina.
Yes, warmly welcome also from me. So let's kick off with the first question to both of you. Do you agree with the main conclusions just presented in this study by Salla-Mari and Magnus? Who would like to start? Emma?
I can start. Push this one. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me, for being here. Peter, I'm so sorry that you are not here in real life. I thought it would be nice to meet you. We're talking a lot and discussing a lot on Twitter. So I thought this would be the first time we meet also face to face, but hopefully in the future. I was really glad to see this study because I think it's a piece of the puzzle that have been missing in the discussions and the debate so much. I don't think it's really up to me, being a consultant experience working also on AFRY. It's not really my job to have opinions about whether the conclusions are true or not. I think we have to rely on the fact that you have been investing is looking at the numbers. And I think as my new role as politician, I shouldn't really argue with that. Obviously, there is a potential. We see it here in this report. And I think the most interesting table was the one where you looked at all of the European policies and how missing that piece have been of the discussion and the policy discussion and so on. Because that's where I think I can have opinions and argues about this. Obviously, there is a huge potential, so why not utilize it and also recognize that in the policy making?
Thank you, Emma. And Peter, you have studied this subject quite thoroughly. What is your comment on the study overall? We'll come into the specific parts of it later.
Yes, thank you, and hello from Stockholm. I, of course, very much agree with the general conclusions of the study, and I've been working, as you mentioned, some time on precisely these matters. And as Emma says, it's so important that this contribution is put on the table as part of the actions and solutions we need in Fit for 55, because it really has been missing. And one of the reasons that it has been missing is that we are stuck in fairly old structures for climate reporting and climate policy, where things are calculated sector by sector. And what's happening here is that we're opening up and looking at contributions that forest products can make in other sectors. And I think this is the real key for the discussion going forward. One way to put this is that we can't only talk about the forest. We must be able to see out of the forest for all the trees. And I want to take this opportunity to mention that we have an international ISO standard in pipeline that will address exactly these issues. And there is considerable interest also from other regions in the world to deal with the positive effects of wood-based products. I have, of course, lots of technical aspects to the report, but I think we can leave them for another forum, perhaps. Just briefly, I do find that both, I think it was mentioned in the presentation, bioenergy is underplayed in this context. And also, only some of the paper-based products are brought into the picture. And finally, I also think that the innovations for new products and solutions is probably underplayed as well. So it's a fairly conservative finding in my view. There is a much bigger potential out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And if we turn back to you, Emma, looking at the ENVI committee and the work that you've been doing over the last years, you alluded to it before, saying that substitution is not that known. Does your colleagues from other parties or other countries, do they have an idea what substitution is? How do we do collectively to help them to realize the potential that we're speaking about here today? What's your experience from that?
I entered the parliament late in the mandate. I joined 3 years ago. And at that time, there was a GRC report on bioeconomy. And that one talked about substitutions and the effects. I think that piece have not played such a big role as it would have. That study from the Commission, I think, highlighted bioeconomy from many different angles. But it was very much forgotten then when we entered the policy discussions. And looking at the policies that we have had, LULUCF, carbon removal certification, deforestation, nature restoration, there is a very much focus on the forest as a carbon sink and the climate value of having the forest as it is. I think the best example of that is a taxonomy, where you do a climate calculation of your forestry, but you do not include substitution effects. I think that was the biggest black and white puzzle piece, if you may, because that it was really shown that you include a climate assessment of your forestry, that it was in the text only looking at effect of the forest standing as it is as a carbon sink. I think that was a bit of a punch in the face. And I think that's why these discussions or these type of reports are so important. I also believe agree with Peter that I think some of these elements are also underestimated. I was surprised when I read the report that textile is so very low, and it's indeed because we don't produce that much textiles in Europe, but the substitution effect of also importing less elastan or polyester from China, I think it's a huge potential. We can actually bring back also textile industry to Europe. I think it's a huge discussion now in fashion industry and textile industry that we want to produce more sustainable textiles and so on. I think that could be a part of also the discussion, not looking only what's produced today in Europe. We should also expand that narrative to what we want to produce in Europe. And then it's also so interesting or important to see, okay, for some sectors, what are the alternatives? And I think specifically the chemical industry is in this report is especially interesting because I think in the policy discussions that we're having in Envy today, my colleagues sometimes talk about that as if there were plenty of options to go fossil free. It could be bio or something else, or as some of my colleagues prefer, we should use less and reduce use, which I think is a bit of an optimistic scenario. And to be fair, if you're looking at chemical industry, there are very few alternatives, where bio-based could be one of the only alternatives for many industries and sectors. So I think that could also be as a complement to this discussion, because now it looks like this is one alternative, one scenario where we can reduce emissions going bio-based. But for some industries, you don't even have that luxury of having an option. This only way of going fossil free. So that's also why it's so critical for some of the industries to really enhance this potential, because that might be the only way of going fossil free.
Thank you, Emma. There's also been a discussion how the emission trading system, the ETS, relates to material substitution. And I know, Peter, that you have views on this. Can you explain the relationship and how they complement each other?
Yes. Obviously, the ETS is a main engine for bringing the emissions down. There is no doubt about that. And the ambitions are very high. But sometimes I find that there is a confusion here that high prices for emissions is all we need. Yes, that will help. But then, given those high prices, what actually will happen on the ground? And as ETS kicks in, corporations and society will, of course, look for alternatives. It can be about efficiency gains, we need that. It can be consumption related, we certainly need that. But a lot will actually be about substitution with renewable materials and energy, not just from the forest, but to a great deal from bio-based materials and energy. And that will also drive investments, it will drive innovations for new products and solutions. So this is the effect of ETS. It is not that ETS in itself will actually carry out these changes, but ETS will lead to the need for these new approaches, and it will drive a higher level of substitution. But sometimes we hear that this is a bit confusing. So again, we need to recognize wood-based products as a main facilitator within the ETS that makes the overall emission reductions possible. And as we've seen in this report, the potential is actually quite big. We're talking tens of percentages of the overall emissions, and that is actually produced within Europe, most of it, and we should really lift this up and shall we say nuance the ways that ETS works.
Interesting. Yes, that's a very clear message that the ETS in itself will not magically solve Europe's climate challenges. Emma, you wanted to come in on that as well, please.
Yeah, since I was also a negotiator for the ETS, I think I also disagree and agree in a sense that ETS has actually nothing to do with materials. I think this is a common misinterpretation that, okay, a price on a price on fossil emissions would help us replace materials, but it actually doesn't. This is not a price on fossil, it's a price on fossil emissions. So ETS is only designed to cover emissions from combustion. So it's only the second half of the product lifetime where ETS is kicking in and being an efficient tool. ETS has nothing to do with the design phase as it is now. There's no incentives today in Europe to replace fossil carbon with green carbon or recycled carbon. When we negotiated now the carbon removal certification framework, we had so many industries coming to us saying, we will recycle carbon, we will have CCU, so we will do CCS, remove carbon atoms, and when we replace fossil by using these cycled atoms, can we get carbon removal certificates? And the sad story to that is no, because carbon removal is removal, not cycling. And there's no piece of regulation today that gives you an incentive to replace a fossil carbon in a product. So ETS absolutely doesn't cover that. And I think that's the biggest flaws of the policy making that we have today. That's why I still believe we need more climate policies the next mandate. Some people talk about it as if we're done with climate policies, but that we have no policy instrument at all for fossil going into products. That I think is a joke. We need to fix that the next mandate, and otherwise there will be no push for substitution effects. And I think that's also why it's missing in the part of the regulatory list, because we have very few policy instruments today on the material side. Material is still the black hole of EU policy.
Can I respond also to that again?
Please, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, then I will also say that I agree and I disagree with Emma, because what I see is that all those other materials require a lot of greenhouse gas emissions for their production. And those emissions are, of course, part of the ETS. So yes, it's true that materials as such are not covered in writing in the agreements at the moment, but indirectly it will have that effect, and that's the point I'm making. That we're after the emissions. That's the main point. If we're after the emissions, then those materials that require large amounts of emissions will go out of business, which is the good thing. So I would say that. Perhaps we need more clarity about the specifics of material substitution, but perhaps that is also making the legislation more complicated than necessary. So there is a discussion to be had there.
Final comment on this as well, because I think we're heading now in that direction. So the traditional ETS is about combustion and when emissions occur, whereas ETS2, the ETS for the transport sector, is actually pricing the fuel itself, not at the time when it's being combustion, rather at the sales. And that opens up a possibility to add more elements of fossil fuels and having a price also at the moment of sale rather than the use phase. And I mean, if you're designing now a plastic bottle, and you're thinking about buying a fossil plastic or bio-based plastic, the only thing you see today is that the bio-based is most often more expensive, whereas the fossil has a price business as usual. If that was to put in some type of ETS where also you added on the sales perspective, that would be a clear incentive on changing and driving that. So the possibility is now there with the ETS2. The EU has opened the door to walk in that direction, but I think that's left to see in the next mandate if we will take those steps. But I think it's very, very important for all of those industrial designers or in industry today, looking at what materials should we use to also have incentives there to go in a more sustainable direction.
Interesting, and that also leads us into the next mandate. You know, what kind of policies do you want to see in the next mandate? And I know that, I mean, this town, of course, there's many voices calling for regulatory pauses in all kind of sectors, really. This sector, but also other sectors. But I know that you, Emma, you have actually said, and you were alluding to it now, that we don't need this regulatory pause. We actually need more rules. I mean, on your, maybe that's not how you expressed it so bluntly, but you know, I make a translation of what you have said before. What would be on your sort of top 3 wish list? You know, also taking into account what we've been speaking about today on the substitution potential.
in many policy areas, I want less regulation as well, but in order to have less regulations, you need to regulate. So also to remove rules, you cannot have a regulatory pause. So say to policymakers that it shouldn't work, I think it's a counterproductive way forward. I think the next mandate, we should have more rules where it's needed and much less rules in many areas. In general, I think we need a regulatory burden that is cutting red tape rather than the opposite. So I think there's indeed more to be done to remove rules. But on some areas, like there, fossil in products, the design phase, fossil going into products, we need a framework. I mean, there are quota, if you buy F-gases, for example, or different type of chemicals, there are now quota systems and so on, but we don't have that for fossil. Or we have ETS when you do combustion, but not when you do fossil into a product. Something is needed there. I think this report also highlights that this substitution will not take place in a vacuum. It will not happen by itself, and also push consumers. I think it was specifically mentioned regarding textiles that consumer choices are also important. And I think in order to have that, I think we need carbon labels on so many more products. I think as industry, you can be reluctant to this approach, but thinking as a consumer perspective, many Swedes in the audience, imagine walking in IKEA. It is extremely challenging to know what materials are to use. Is bamboo better than plastic or steel or metal, or what type of wood products are better to use? It's really hard to make informed consumer choices. I think H&M is even a better example. Buying a new pair of jeans, to know how much was emitted when buying those, how much is recycled fiber, and what does that have to do with the emissions, so on. I think from a consumer perspective, that's what they will ask from the internal market, to provide us with information about the CO2 footprint of a product. So that is something I think will have to be developed. Imagine doing that in 27 different ways. It would be a mess. So also from an industry perspective, EU needs to do something there. To have less regulation, you need more EU regulation, which is contradictory in a way. And then we worked very hard, me and Gustav, on the carbon removal certification framework that only creates certificates for negative emissions, bio-CCS and DAX, but who will use that? And we need to create also a market for that. I'm talking especially with all of these small scale bioenergy plants all around Sweden. They cannot go to Microsoft all by themselves, asking for them to buy certificates and create these type of contracts. They need a platform to easily push, okay, we have X amount of tons of negative emissions that we can sell and bid that into a market. And that would be extremely helpful if this was a European market, a European platform, and also with a set criteria that each member state needs to fulfill a target on how much negative emissions they have. So those three areas, I think, are really good examples: the negative emissions, the carbon labeling, and the fossil in products, where we need more regulation. I'm so sorry, but there are clear missing elements here. And if you're going to fix this, if we're going to reach climate targets, I think we also have to improve where we can improve.
Great, thank you, Emma. I think the lawmakers in Brussels are very happy that there are more to do during the next mandate period. We have to move into the Q&A with the audience, but I have one last question for Peter still that I think it's important to clarify, and that's the fiber supply, because we saw from the study that we need more fiber supply, and the study hints at that there are some possibilities in Europe. What do you think, Peter? Do you agree? Can we increase the fiber supply?
Well, I mean, there are several aspects to this. First of all, we now have policies that's called LULUCF that tries to stop fiber supply in many parts of Europe. And that's, of course, a totally counterproductive policy in itself, but I won't go into that more at the moment. Now, from what we have, volumes may or may not increase. Maybe there is a potential, as is said in the study. Long-term investments in forest management can certainly improve things, and we've seen that in the Nordics for a very long time. We've also seen it in many parts of the rest of Europe that forest management does improve the growth and the availability of wood. Then whether that's available to markets and so on, that's a different story. But I think more interesting than the fiber supply volumes is the much bigger potential in how well we use the available supply. Because there is a huge potential. Very large volumes that we harvest today are used extremely effectively. For example, as domestic wood fuel. more than 100 million cubic meters per year, almost all of that outside the Nordics, by the way, are used in this way. And that's in itself a big waste. We could do much better in using the volumes that we have. And that counts also innovation for new products, more integrated value chains, etc., etc. So if you turn around the question and say, can we do more with what we have, then absolutely.
Very interesting. Time is running, unfortunately, too quickly, but so it's time to move into the Q&A with the audience. So we would like to invite Salla-Mari and Magnus also to take places on the stage.
And of course, if you have a question, please raise your hand and introduce yourself. And there is also a microphone in the room that is important for the online audience. So we'll also ask you to please use the microphone. We have a question from the gentleman over here. Is there a microphone?
And we have another one over here, then after that.
Shh. Please.
Yes, Mark van Muntegue, University Ghent, Belgium. So 50 years ago, we started the gene engineering in plants. Till now, it has been proven for scientists that what the evolution was and all the domestication of plants that we have done moves around pieces of DNA, just like we moved around pieces. And there is an enormous opportunity because with our knowledge on microorganisms, we can turn the Sahara green again. And the physicists have with nanomaterials shown that even in the Death Valley, the price of Solvay from yesterday, that in the Death Valley, you can have an enormous amount of water, some 22 liters a day on some square, some cubic centimeter. So the water problem, the physicists have already solved. The genetic engineering was there, and it is only for people can do the history of all the laws that say that you cannot use genetic engineered trees, but none is as each to see with scientific value. It's and how we can interpret and handle emotional that has not been studied in science very much, and since the Greeks. Thank you.
So that's something to comment, I guess. Shall we take a second question also? We had a gentleman over there. Yes.
Thank you. Harald Mauser, European Forest Institute. I have questions to each of the two speakers and the related questions to Peter. To Salla-Mari, did I understand you right? The climate benefit of a product consists of two components, the substitution component and the carbon storage component. You were dealing with the substitution component. If I'm right, then your total climate benefit would be bigger if you include the carbon storage component, and that links to my question to Peter. Peter, you presented with CEP in 2020 study on the climate benefits of EU forest-based sector for the year 2018 with 806 million tons CO2 equivalent total benefit per year. So that is bigger in 2018 than the estimate for 2015, the today's study. Is this the difference between the two components and maybe other countries included? I'm a little bit confused about the different figures that you have. And my question to Magnus is, what type of forest graphs model did you use to predict this surplus of supply in 2050? Because if we look in science and existing studies, almost all tree species reduce the increment at the moment, even beech, since decades. We have a changing disturbance regime. And if we change to more deciduous trees that have a slower growth pace than coniferous trees, even the adaptation that we need to do in forest will reduce forest growth for a while, and then it will improve afterwards. So where do you get this optimistic outlook on forest growth in 2050?
Very many questions there, and a comment from the gentleman. Who would like to start? I think you were all addressed. Would Salla-Mari like to start?
Yes. So I can start about this biogenic CO2. So in our calculations, we focused only on material substitution. But of course, in these long life products, for example, in the structural building materials, of course, there is also potential for increased climate savings. For example, in these sawnwood products that can store CO2. So impact would be higher when we take into account the carbon storage of these product areas. But in this study, we only focused on the substitution impact.
Okay, shall I continue?
Yeah, Peter.
Thanks, and thank you for remembering that old CEPI study. In fact, the results correspond extremely well with the findings of this report, because the substitution effect in that older study came to about 400 million tons, and now you come to 390. So I would say that's pretty close. And the other 400 in the CEPI study was mainly the forest itself, where we have a tremendous increase of the carbon stock in the forest, plus also, as you mentioned, the storage in forest in wood-based products. And there is a lot of focus on long-lived products in the discourse, and that's always lifted up as the main thing we should do with products, and that's because it's part of LULUCF. But what we should keep in mind here is that yes, there is a good potential to store more carbon in products, but the substitution effect is much bigger. Whether you talk about construction, or you talk about plastic materials and packaging, or even if you talk about energy products, well, they don't have any storage, but the substitution effect can be 5 times higher. Typically, it is 5 times higher than the storage effect. And also, if you only look at the storage, then you get an incentive to use a lot of material to build a house. Whereas if you look at the substitution, you get an incentive to maybe build 2 houses with the same material. You get twice the benefit. So the results correspond very well. Long-lived products are good, but substitution is even better.
Magnus, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'll actually have to defer part of the technical part of the question to AFRY on that as well. But the general line of thinking here is that there are many parts of Europe, as Peter said, that we're either not using efficiently what we already have, or we're not really at all managing parts of the forests. And if we can collectively, as a European continent, try to move forward by promoting active management of forests, and that will help a great deal. And AFRY, maybe you can comment on the specific sort of models.
Yeah, I think this is a good question, and luckily we have Sami Pastila here, who is our forestry expert. So maybe you can, Sami, comment on this question.
We will need a microphone. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Salla-Mari. So I'm Sami Pastila from AFRY, part of the working group of this study. Going back to your question regarding this potential that we highlighted for additional fiber supply. So basically, the approach that we took there was to compare the net growth, as stated by the State of the European Forest report, to the current use of the forests, and based on that difference, so this type of a additional potential was estimated. You are absolutely correct that, and going back to Magnus's comments, that we need to continually to evolve and develop our forestry practices. So we need to maintain, we need to protect the forests in a manner that this type of a decreases in the growth that we have seen now in Europe will be mitigated.
And I think you will be here also after the event, of course. So if you have more detailed questions on the data, I'm sure that you're happy to take questions also after the event this morning.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I think we had some more questions. Yeah. So please, should we take a few more questions? Of course, please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Yes. Michael Losch from DG Agri, European Commission. I think this is an extremely valuable study and the right theme. Also, the Commission is doing a communication, I think this week, on biotechnology and biomanufacturing, which links into that. I was puzzled about the first figure, the 390 million tons substitution already going on, and then the potential. And when we see these 390 million tons, I think I read 200 and 310. So the vast majority is coming from the building sector, whereas then in the potential towards 2050, the building sector is rather smaller in the potential. So for me, that's a little bit a conflict of thought. So it's such a high potential in the starting point, but a lower potential for the future. Why do you come to this conclusion that there is little potential? Also looking at initiatives like New European Bauhaus and other initiatives.
Very good question. I think that's for AFRY to answer, but we'll take a second one. We have two more. Can we take? Well, we take two more. Yes, and then the panel can answer.
Thank you. Christoph Sykes from Construction Products Europe. So I represent all construction product materials. I normally refrain from entering debates where we put buildings alongside a T-shirt and a plastic bottle. But some of the statements this morning are a little worrying. We have standards, as one of your speakers said, and there is a European standard called EN 15824, which has 13 core indicators, including carbon, which will be the first one included in the product declarations. So when I hear a product family promoting a single indicator, when, in a standard we have 13, and buildings are supposed to be sustainable, so the European Commission has a methodology called levels to define the sustainability of a building based on multi-criteria. This is the way forward. And let me remind you that we, the construction industry, are going through the worst crisis in decades. So put back science where it should be, and the multi-indicators where, and fighting for market shares is fine. It's part of the EU single market. But, substitution is fine, but we are told to do reuse and recycling. Substitution may be a double-edged sword for you, because if we are looking at recyclable products, then we look at other indicators and other impacts. So please refer to the European instruments, because this is the way the whole industry, the whole value chain of construction needs to go, and it is required to go on a legal basis. Last thing, in your paper, you say substitute in buildings. This is not EU competence. This is national competence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a third question there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel Bauder from the German Property Federation. We represent the German real estate sector along the whole value chain, around about 20% of the German economy. And I would like to take up what the two speakers before me just said, even though I had that question in mind before. Actually, what we do see in Germany is, I can confirm, a significant decrease, and not only in Germany, of construction. And that means also a significant decrease in the availability of housing. I think I don't have to go further in explaining what that means in terms of social problems, and also in terms of political problems, with the more and more radical parties gaining ground, and what that means for the EU. So what I always hear, and we always hear from our members, even though we very much support the idea of the Green Deal, no question about that. We are involved in the New European Bauhaus initiative as well, and work with that one on that one with the Parliament and the Commission. I think it's a very smart and important initiative. But what we do see, and that's not just the lobbyist, blah, blah, we need less regulation and so on. What we do see is that the amount of EU Green Deal legislation is, of course, so significant and expensive as well, in terms of analyzing what do you have to do, how can you implement it, and so on. The costs are just huge. And what we understand, all of us here in the Brussels bubble, is that the next commission will probably more concentrate on growth and less on EU green regulation, if I may so. So my question here would be, against that background, when you mentioned, Magnus, the need of an adequate legislation, and you said we need more EU rather than less legislation, which I think in principle is right, but still, how can we deal with that contradiction of growth needed Definitely. Do we need, in this respect, actually less legislation? Do we need more? What do you think is going to happen in that respect in the upcoming mandate?
Thank you. Thank you. I promise one last question here. Time is running out, so unfortunately we may not be able to take all the questions, but I said all the people will be here also after the event. So one last question, and then we'll offer the panelists, maximum 1 minute maybe to summarize or answer some of the questions as you seem fit, and then we'll ask Henrik to conclude the event. So please, the floor is yours if you have a quick question.
Quick. Carina Christiansen, representing northern Sweden, the 4 northernmost regions of Sweden. We have a forest cover with more than 70%. And for all the legislations that have recently been negotiated and gone through, about 8 of them regarding forest, they have caused a lot of worry in the region, of course. And still, on Friday now, I'm going to talk in Jämtland about this. And so I will ask the panel, what can I say to cheer them up?
So shall Salla-Mari start again with the question of methodology here in the construction sector?
Yeah. So I can comment on this existing substitution potential where you mentioned the share of wood product that was 310 million CO2 equivalent. So construction is part of that volume, but we have to remember that we have also other wood products. So in this category, we have sawn wood, wood-based panels, and wood insulation board. So for example, in sawn wood, we have also other end-use areas than only construction. For example, sawn wood is used in furniture, joinery, pallets, and these kind of applications. So that climate impact is also included in this 310. But then when we calculated the additional substitution potential, where we see that in the construction sector, the highest potential is coming from these new wooden buildings. So that's why there is this difference between the existing substitution and then the additional substitution calculations.
And Peter, do you want to say something about the recycling is more important than substitutions?
Well, it's part of the equation, of course. I would like to, I can say that, and the ISO standard I mentioned is also bringing this into the picture. Obviously, this is not about dismissing any of the good solutions that we have. This is to highlight the substitution effects. But my main, we can spend 30 seconds on a final comment. I appreciate the notes that this can't be only about the climate. Just as we shouldn't get stuck in the forest, we can't get stuck with emissions reductions because that would be a very difficult, very tough choices for the legislation to make. What we have to do is to figure out how can we find ways where economic development, all those other sustainability issues that we need to handle, and not least self-sufficiency and security of the union go hand in hand with the solutions for the climate. And in fact, that's exactly what they do if we talk about the wood-based sector, be it construction or other types of products. So I think we have a triple or a quadruple win here if we allow these things to align. And of course, we shouldn't isolate the climate topic.
Thank you. I think we'll give the word to Emma, and then Magnus. Yes, I would very much like to have a final comment from you. What is, with all the discussion, what is your thing? What's your main conclusion of the study? Also, Emma.
We need a critical bioeconomy act. I mean, the mining industry have critical raw materials act really now highlighting the demand for critical raw materials. I think we need the same for the bioeconomy, because bioeconomy is so important if we're gonna fix climate change and if we're gonna have industry and growth and also all of the work opportunities. And I think now the regulation has been a bit one-sided. Green Deal has focused on the green aspects and green elements, but there are so many other important areas of this. The GRC studies was a bit forgotten. I'm really glad that we have the European Commission here today, because it's really not me you should talk to. We need to talk about the substitution effects with more stakeholders in the European Commission, in the ENVI committee, and we need that also to be reflected in the Critical Bioeconomy Act. So the substitution, the work employment, the growth and the GDP contribution that this sector has as a part of the discussion with Green Deal and environment and biodiversity and forestry and so on. But we cannot focus on few elements. We need a comprehensive act, really showing in also industry and the forest owners of Jämtland that their sector is very much needed. Because as we have seen also in this report, many sectors don't have alternatives. And specifically talking about chemicals and textiles and so on, going into bioeconomy is really what can drive change for them. So you can tell the forest owners that they are needed, their contribution is needed, their forestry is needed, and they should really be the center of discussion. They are the ones we should talk to. We should not talk about them, we should talk to them. And hopefully that can create a good signal. But final remark, the fiber use that Peter mentioned, I think that's also very important to address, because a bioeconomy does not mean business as usual. It will mean that it will be harder competition, chemical industry, aviation industry, textile industry, glass industry will pay a lot for the fibers. And I take every opportunity I can to talk to the energy industry about that the district heating systems and the fuel that they are now sourcing will be extremely valuable raw material and goods. So it will mean a bioeconomy that's also changing, and it will mean different things to different sectors, and that's important to have also a part of the discussion. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Very important remarks. Magnus.
Emma is such a pro, so it's difficult to follow up that. But I think it's not that difficult to summarize the report. We can do more with our fiber supply in Europe. We've been looking fairly one-eyed on this for the past couple of years, but we need to look at it from a holistic point of view. We need to work out solutions to these problems as a continent, because this is a common problem. And we need to get the policy framework in place. And we also need to get the innovation engine started, enabled to actually create economics around this. So
excellent.
That's the conclusion.
Thank you. And then the word goes to Henrik Vasallo, who is EU Affairs Advisor from the Wallenberg office.
First of all, I would like to say thank you to Torbjörn. I'm not sure that I would have let this many people into my house, especially not maybe for a breakfast. But thank you very much for having us here. Also like to say thank you to AFRY for all the work you have done in preparing the study, and to the panelists, Emma and Peter. Excellent that you have been able to be here. My name is Henrik Vasallo, and I'm based here in Brussels since a couple of months, representing the Wallenberg family interest. I will say some words on that later on. But what I would like to start with is that FAM, as the private holding company of the Wallenberg family, normally does not engage in policy. We do not do lobbying or government relations in that sense. This is an exception, a big exception actually, so that Håkan Buskhe was speaking to us is something he never does. It's the companies that we own that are dealing with their own issues. But this is a priority, which is very, very important for us as an owner family, but also for us in Sweden and the Nordics. But as we heard also, the potential for the future does not lie in that region. It's rather in the southern part of our beautiful continent. So the priorities that FAM have as a company are perfectly aligned with the priorities that we have to do to get this right, and it's competitiveness, sustainability in terms of climate and biodiversity. Those are the two top headlines that the family is really engaging in. So therefore, it fits quite well with our engagement in forest related matters. As I said, I will not try to do any conclusions of the study, but I mean, some remarks, of course, increase the supply of fiber, grow the bioeconomy. We heard from the Belgian presidency some days ago that they were floating an idea to have a dedicated bioeconomy commissioner in the next commission. And then, of course, to us, how can we engage in is that we increase the productivity of the already planted trees, that we increase biodiversity. And we are doing this not alone. We are doing this together with a European Forest Alliance, and I see quite a number of members here. I'm not going to ask you to scream out, but it's from a range of countries, 6, 7 countries that are working side by side with us as FAM, and we are very thankful for that here in Brussels, but also in the capitals. We have developed a manifesto. I'm sure you have heard about it, but if you haven't, Katarina has a bunch here, so we'll be happy to distribute that with our policy asks for the next commission. Finally, as I said, I'm representing both Investor, the listed holding company, FAM, the private holding company, but also the family in the sense of Wallenberg office here in Brussels. And we have some priorities. It's competitiveness. It's the way we work in long-term issues. It's forming alliances that we are seeing in this case, and working together with other family businesses. And I would say when I wrote this down and I looked at it, I thought this is perfect for engaging in forestry related matters, because those are the topics that absolutely are fundamental for forestry going forward. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you, QED, for organizing and helping us with all the technical arrangements today. And I hope to see you soon again in November, when we will have our annual seminar, third annual seminar here in Brussels. Thank you very much.